we have Dr. Viknish Krishnan Kutty, founder and CEO of Celivate Technologies Singapore, and his talk will be on science and religion, my vision for the future. So let me introduce him. Dr. Viknish Krishnan Kutty is a scientific entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of Celivate Technologies, as well as a biomedical researcher at the Nanoscience and Nanotechnology Institute at the National University of Singapore, NUS. He obtained his bachelor's in engineering in biomedical engineering from the State University of New York, Stony Brook, United States, in 2006, and then completed his PhD in bioengineering at the National University of Singapore in 2011. He's a bioengineer with expertise in oncology, neuroscience, and stem cells. His research interests include modeling methods and creating technologies to control mammalian cells and promote clean meat revolution. He's a recipient of the NUS Graduate Research Innovation Program Fellowship in 2016. He's also currently the president of the Society for Bhagavad Culture in Singapore, and has a keen interest in understanding the synthesis of science and spirituality. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the screen and stage to Dr. Viknish Krishnan Kutty, sir.
So, well, before I start, I just want to thank the organizers for allowing me to present my views here. So, as it is in our culture, we will first say a short prayer to evoke the blessings of our teachers, specifically Dr. T.D. Singh, for his blessings that this endeavor will be pleasing to him. So Vedic culture is such that knowledge is passed from the master to the disciple, and in that way, knowledge is spread. And this is not just a theoretical thing, but it's a very practical thing, because by us following these so-called procedures, we are able to get enlightened in knowledge that otherwise would not be within our reach. So, but the material vision of acquiring knowledge is that the hardest worker gets more knowledge, or the person with the better brain capacity gets more knowledge. So we can see that it's very different from Vedic culture. So today I want to present some thoughts on how a synthesis can be possible and what the benefits would be. So the fact that we are on this platform already means that we are favorable to such a synthesis of science and spirituality, and that it's going to be good for us, right? So so we need to ask ourselves, right? So why is this important? Why do we want a synthesis of science and religion? Because the world is going on as it is going on, right? Without really a need for this kind of a synthesis or any kind of scientific understanding of spirituality. So why is there a need, and why is this so important? So if we try to understand this from a modern scientific point of view, we wouldn't get an answer, right? Because we would be like, as a scientist, I'm saying, we would be like fish in a small pond that's unable to understand what's beyond the pond, right? So no matter how much so-called research the fish does within the pond, there's only so much they can understand. So we need to understand this from a larger perspective. So we know from Bhagavad Gita that this devotional service is said to be devotional service to God is said to be the king of knowledge, right? And so all knowledge culminates at the devotional service to the Lord. And this also is our real position, our real constitutional position as living entities. So if and then of course there are numerous verses in the Vedic scripture. One of them, this from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Savai Pumsham Paro Dharmo. So we know that this is the supreme occupation, the constitutional position, the Jaiva Dharma of the living entity, right? So, and it's not just living entities who believe in it, but living entities um, in entirety, right? For every living entity on this planet. So, the purpose for us to in my understanding, the purpose for us to understand this knowledge is really to present this knowledge to the scientific minded um, individuals around the planet, so they can understand that there is a higher knowledge coming, right? Because the while in Vedic tradition knowledge is accepted from the guru, in in today's world knowledge is accepted by the from the scientists, right? Because so the scientists are like the has Dr. T.D. Singh used to say, the scientists are like the present day gurus. So whatever the scientists say, everybody just accepts. Right? For example, why is abortion allowed at a certain period? Is because the scientists say that um, life or consciousness has not been formed during that period, and so they allow this to happen. Um, Examples, right? So there are times when they would say certain foodstuff are healthy, and another time they would say certain foods are unhealthy, and all this is by the dictation of the scientist. So if the scientist can understand that there are higher sources of knowledge, and there is such a thing called the king of knowledge, then it'll be easier for the common public to understand. So if you look at knowledge itself, right, I'm talking about knowledge today, right? Scientific knowledge in this material world in Kali Yuga today. There's knowledge coming from science, um, right? And then there's knowledge coming from other sources, which is really hearsay and superstitions and all this. And then there's knowledge coming from the scriptures. Okay, so the in this confused environment, where you have knowledge coming from different sources, some are validated in the form of science, some are accepted from in the scripture, but otherwise it's just it basically anything goes, right? In this day and age, and with this kind of a philosophy where everything goes, people are just getting more and more degraded in the society we live in. So one way to perhaps come out of this is to uh, have a have a combination of the spiritual knowledge coming from the scriptures, authentic spiritual knowledge coming from the scriptures, with scientific knowledge. So the benefit of scientific knowledge, which I will talk about a little later also, is that to some extent there's a check and balance, right? So at least if things are presented scientifically, then there's a better chance of nonsense not going in as in the name of knowledge. Okay, so like Dr. T.D. Singh used to say that all the religious leaders, the bona fide religious leaders, should come together, and they should scrutinizingly go through the scriptures and eliminate the parts that don't maybe eliminate, not eliminate, but to not focus on the parts, right, that are not leading to the upliftment of humanity, because there's some parts of the scriptures that are not relevant for this day and age, and it may be for a different time, right? Because if you look at the different religions, if you look at the different scriptures, there's a cultural context as well as a spiritual context, and which is why it's so important to have a bona fide guru, because then they can tell us which is the cultural context, which is the spiritual context, and how we can we can follow, right? So you're saying that sometimes just within religion itself, there's so much contradiction, and the common people can't decipher which is real spiritual knowledge and which is something of a cultural context. And by mixing these two, it's going to lead to obviously going to lead to problems. I'll be happy to discuss more of this later, right? But if you take it, if you understand things from a scientific point of view, then there's like a check and balance, because um, it's no longer based on dogma, or it's no longer based on fanaticism. Okay, so in the Vedic scriptures, they talk about 10 different forms of getting knowledge, 10 different ways of getting knowledge, right? First is direct perception, which is what the modern science is all about. So direct perception meaning using our senses. And then we have by inference. So inference is really, if it's not A, if it's not B, then it has to be C, right? That kind of rational, that kind of logic and rationale. And then, but the Vedic scriptures tell us that these forms of knowledge are still inferior compared to getting knowledge from a higher source or a revealed source, revealed knowledge, that is. And the reason for this is because with inference and direct perception, there's a limit to the amount of knowledge we can get. Like the example I gave earlier, the fish in the pond can only understand to the within the realm of the pond, and maybe at the interface between the pond and air. The water and air, right? But it's not able to understand anything more than that. But when knowledge is coming from a revealed source, from a source that has seen what is the truth and what is not the truth, then we get real knowledge. Okay, so the present modern science, it focuses on just the direct perception and inference, right? In fact, it completely disregards any kind of revealed knowledge as being dogma, and this is the part I feel that we need to use our intelligence to kind of break the barrier, because this is the most important part, right? Shabda or revealed knowledge is the most important part because it gives us knowledge of the soul and it gives us knowledge of who we really are. So this is something that I'll be happy to have a discussion later, perhaps after the presentation. Okay, so when we talk about modern science today, right? Modern science today talks about the scientific method, right? And the scientific method goes through a procedure where there's observation, and then based on the observation, you make a hypothesis, and then you test the hypothesis, and then you tweak and then you make observation again, and then you tweak the hypothesis. But science per se, from the context of the word scientia, is really just the pursuit of knowledge. And before, in the olden days, spiritual knowledge and material knowledge were taken as to be just knowledge, right? In fact, it is said that if you look at the autobiography of Isaac Newton, there are many parts within his autobiography where he would say that, especially when he can't explain something, he would say that because the Lord willed it this way, it happened. And then from this part to this part, the Lord must have wanted it that way, right? So he references God a lot, even in his scientific writings, going to show that there's very little distinction between what is material knowledge or spiritual knowledge, but rather it's just the pursuit of knowledge. But because of the misuse of science, or rather because of the misuse of such kind of thinking, in today's world, science just means knowledge gathered by sense perception and inference, while everything else is taken as dogma, and it's up to the individual to accept it or not, right? So because it's not possible to put knowledge that's beyond the realm of the senses through this diagram or through the scientific method. Okay, so if you just take the scientific method alone and we try to understand who we are, right? We could break our body down to organs and cells and to molecules, but we will never be able to find life. You know, I've been working on cells for the last maybe 12 years now, and 12, 15 years, yeah, 15 years now. And you will never be able to find life just by looking under the microscope, right? So I will talk a little bit more about this in the coming slides. But the point I'm making is that just by our perception, it's impossible to understand who we are. We can understand what the body is made up of. We can understand how the different organs, the different cells, the different molecules interact with each other. We can understand how to study these things, but life itself is impossible, right? So the study of biology has made great strides in many areas, but it's still not able to define life, right? If you break down life just based on the study of biology, then it would mean that we're just this body um, uh, running on the genetic code, right? So according to our genes, we would be either this way or that way. The goal of life is just to be happy, and then you die, right? But we know from the Vedic perspective that is not the case, right? In fact, the entire study of biology should be focused on because biology means the study of life, right? So it should be focused on who I am, and as human beings, that's according to our Vedic scriptures, that's the most fundamental knowledge that every civilized person needs to ask, like, who am I? What is my purpose here? Why am I suffering? These kind of questions. Who is God? But if we just try to understand it from the scientific point, we won't be able to, right? But at the same time, if we say that the Vedic scriptures are scientific because it's broken down in a very systematic way, then we ourselves will be convinced, but the scientific community, the general scientific community will not be convinced because it does not fall into their paradigm of what is science, right? Um, so yeah, so we know from Vedic scriptures that life is not just the body, but there's also the subtle body, and there's also the spiriton, which is completely missing in normal science. So here in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna tells us that there's earth, water, fire, air, ether, which are the gross elements, and then there's mind, intelligence, false ego, which are the subtle elements. But there's something superior, and that superior particle, or the jiva, or the particle of life, or spiriton, right? Different terminologies. This is completely non-material, and so with our material senses and our material brain, how are we going to understand something that is beyond the scope of our purview, right? So it's not possible. Okay, but yeah, so it's not possible. And if the goal, or as I mentioned earlier, as the constitutional position of every living entity is to establish a relationship with divinity, with God, um, then how will science as we know it do it? I mean, how, just from a scientific point of view, how do we do it? We can't, right? So there will always be this disparity where we would be discussing these things from a scientific point of view, but it will not touch the scientists. So what I wanted to share is how is it we can talk about these things from a scientific point of view, that will bring more so-called scientific credibility that will allow us to have more conversations with the wider scientific community, right? So we already said that we want to put together the knowledge of the scriptures together with science as we know it, and modern science has got many advantages, many benefits, right? Because the way science itself is done is extremely systematic. Findings have to go through a peer review process, and in some cases, it is not in some cases, all cases, it has to be repeated. Experiments need to be validated based on previous findings. All right, so there's a very strong check and balance process as opposed to just dogma coming through, right? So by us um, uh, try by us breaking down the 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 spiritual understanding in a way that it's not dogmatic, right, would be one way to start a conversation, right? So spiritual knowledge is also very systematic, right? But it's based on having knowledge being received from higher sources, as opposed to modern science, where you have a pool of data that's established as fact. Now, that is not that of course it's not may not be facts. It's accepted as fact at that time and place, but it may not be a fact because the instruments used to decipher that has so-called fact, or is defective, right? Which we can talk more during the discussion. But and also the real goal of modern science has nothing spiritual. It's really just for economic gain. It's for intellectual pursuits. It's for having a better life. So, to break it down to a nutshell. While with spiritual knowledge, there is a proper procedure, that is based on faith, and it's really applied spiritual knowledge, because it's a whole lifestyle in gaining. It's not something you just read from a book and your knowledge, but rather it's a whole lifestyle that you practice. Right. So both of these are very different, even though there are similarities that can be shared. Okay. So one some of the thoughts I have to make this conversation more fruitful are some of these that I mentioned. Many of these are based on the writings of Dr. T.D. Singh, or conversations with Dr. T.D. Singh, right? So one of it is a working definition of life and consciousness. So a very simple definition of life, even within science, like as we learn, even in school, right? In secondary school, in primary school, is that life, it takes a simple definition. Life takes birth, it grows, it replicates, and it dies. Right? It's a very simple definition of life. And so when we speak to scientists and we tell them that consciousness is the symptom of life, as we have learned from the Vedic scriptures, the immediate reaction is that is nonsense, because a cell has life, right? A cell goes through all this. Everybody knows that the cell is alive, but from their perspective, the cell does not have consciousness, because consciousness is a symptom of the nervous system, right? So I feel that and the conversation ends there, right? Because our definition of consciousness and their definition of consciousness is very different. So perhaps one thing we can do as a community is to have a very good working definition of science and consciousness that is based on certain principles, right? Certain axioms, which everyone can accept, because that will be the start of the conversation. Otherwise, the conversation just ends there. So to give you an example, I in the second Savijnanam, there is I believe it's the second Savijnanam, there's an article on consciousness. So I showed this to one of my professors, and in there, Dr. T.D. Singh speaks about how nobody really knows what consciousness is. And immediately the professor retorted saying, no, we have so many studies on consciousness, and so we already know what consciousness is, and there are studies and there's research going on in consciousness. And then he quotes Creek and some other scholars in that area. But when I look at their work, it's true that there is a lot of thought in this area of consciousness, but it's complete speculation. So it will be good if we can, as a community, have a working definition of life and consciousness that we can talk about. Because then, and it should be based on some fundamental principles, some almost like axioms, right? Which we can say that based on such and such, we define consciousness as this. So that is one thought I have, because otherwise it's very difficult to even continue the conversation, and there'll always be a separation between the community. Another one is which is discussed in many places, is about viruses, and this is very relevant to our modern times now, right? So I mean, we can see that it causes havoc, right? It's brought the whole world down to its knees, but to date we don't know whether it's alive or it's dead. There are some scientists who say it's alive, and there are some scientists that say that it's not alive, because the virus does not replicate by itself. The virus does not grow. The virus does not replicate by itself. It does not grow. What the virus does is that it hijacks the host cells, right? Cells within us, for example, or it could be plants, could be bacteria. It would hijack those cells, and it would put its own genetic material, either DNA or RNA, into the into the cell, and it would trick the cell to, or cheat the cell to think that it's the cell's responsibility to make more of it, right? So the cell is what makes more of the virus, and not the virus itself, right? And so the cell makes a lot of these virus, and then the cell explodes, and this virus goes to other cells, and it continues to do the same thing, and then it leaves the organism. It can, right, depending on the size of the cell, depending on the size of the virus and whatnot, it spreads, right? But the virus itself, if we just isolate the virus itself, it cannot do anything. So is the virus dead or is the virus alive? To date, we don't have an answer to this, right? So by having a working definition of life and consciousness, right? These ambiguities, which are very real, we can have a better understanding of these things, and perhaps by having a better understanding of these things, we will know better how to deal with them even. Right? So another one is the concept of super enzymes. So super enzymes was discussed in the book Thoughts of Synthesis, Science and Religion, and also many other places, where we know that the entire evolutionary process took millions and billions of years to happen. Right? At least that's what we know from the textbook, based on that paradigm. So basically, what it consists of is you have simple chemicals that become more complex chemicals, and then they go larger in size, and then you have RNA-like structures. In some cases, some argue that no, they start off as DNA-like structures. But whatever the case, the point is that simple molecules become organic molecules, which eventually form life that starts replicating, right? So since we there's no way to validate this, right? Because the compounds that were there before, there's no way to validate that the same compounds are there today, because they could have also changed over time, right? So, but if we are able to produce enzymes or super enzymes that can act as a catalyst to this to the entire process, then we can have a better idea whether such a reaction is even possible, right? And to what extent are we speculating on this, right? So this is another area where I feel we can work with scientists, or perhaps perhaps we developed the University of Bhagavad culture, these things can be studied, because it's not just good for our understanding, but it will do good for the entire world, right? Another concept is things like alternative medicines coming from the East, such as Ayurveda, acupuncture, and even astrology, right? So there are within these sciences, there is a lot of practical knowledge, especially with regards to health, right? So how does, for example, Ayurveda, how do the different elements within Ayurveda, such as Vata, Kapha, Pitta, do these relate with science as we know it, right? Is how do we see a correlation between certain genetic mutations to the imbalance in these Kapha, Pitta, Vata, right? How, because if we can, we know Ayurveda works, right? There are numerous cases of Ayurveda working, and even the Ayurvedic lifestyle, and the same with acupuncture. But how does this connect with modern science and modern medicine? Because if we can find areas of connectivity, then that's another place of synthesis that we can start communicating on. And so remember, the reason why I'm bringing on these points is because we wanna um, we wanna show not we wanna use that as a pivot or as a leverage uh, to bring in the scientific basis of Vedic knowledge, right? Because unless there is some kind of a leverage, it's just going to be a philosophical exercise, right? So these areas would be another point of leverage where we can actually work together. So there are already some, especially in the realm of traditional Chinese medicine, where some very experienced scientists are working on different herbs to understand the medical properties of them. Okay, then yoga is another one, right? The entire then the whole world really is fascinated by yoga, and they even have a World Yoga Day where everybody comes together and does yoga. But the yoga that is being spoke about is just the physical exercise of it, right? So that is another point, right, where we can bring in the scientific elements of how yoga helps helps people in controlling their mind, in controlling their health, their breathing, and so on. Because I've read of cases of people who have been told by the doctors that they'll never walk again, and then they start doing yoga as much as they can, and their mobility increases dramatically. Right. So, what is the science behind this? Why is it that ordinary physiotherapy is not able to do it, but yoga is able to do it? Right? And then last but definitely not least, I mean last on this list, but there are many other examples of how we can synthesize science and spirituality. But so this is past life studies. So um, there's been many studies, over thousands of studies on this subject. In fact, over the last few decades, even in the fields of studying depression and anxiety, researchers have resort to past life regression has a tool to actually understand what the real factor or the real cause of the anxiety is. And this also has been documented. One popular clinician, his name is Brian Weiss, but there are many others who use these techniques, right? So one thing we can do really is to understand more about um, their scientific method of how is it that while the general scientific community does not believe in things like past life studies, how is it they are able to appreciate it, and not just appreciate it, but put it into application, right? So Some others are like Dr. Ian Stevenson, who's passed away, but who is very popular in this field because he's done more than 3,000 case studies of children who claim to remember their past lives, and how he documents, very scientifically documents the process, right? And then there's this rabbi, and generally the Jewish faith does not believe in reincarnation, right? But this rabbi has written books on how on some of the people in his congregation and outside were actually either killed or tortured or had gone through the Holocaust, and now they are suffering the effects based on the trauma then, right? So this, I feel, is another way we can show, we can bring in Vedic knowledge, to into the mainstream and scientific community. And again, why is it we want to do this? We want to do this because the as I mentioned earlier in the right. The goal of life is, so you can, yeah, right? The goal of life is or the king of knowledge is really devotional service to God, right? And in order to establish this to the so-called gurus of the world today, then we need to use a language that they would understand. And so these are some of my thoughts of how we can do that. So I will stop here, and I'm looking forward to the question and answer. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Viknish, Krishnan, Kutty. Now we'd like to open up the floor for questions from the participants. So I encourage you to please introduce yourself and where you're from. Can we have the spotlight, the screen sharing off, please, and we can have the speaker on the spotlight. So I see Nikit. Before Nikit, can we give someone else a chance first? Dr. Jayanti Chavan, could you please ask the first question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can.
Thank you.
Good evening, Good evening, Dr. Jayanti. How are you?
Yeah, good evening. I'm fine. I like your session. I'm with you on the thoughts of synthesis, but I have some queries. First thing is Professor Charles Towns. He made a very profound statement that science is not necessarily materialistic. It is also in search of truth. And this, so how does his understanding, and like him, some scientists have said, how it fits into you had presented in one slide the two columns, science and spirituality.
Yeah.
So this is my first question, and second is I agree with you on the thoughts of synthesis regarding this working definition of life and consciousness. I think that is the biggest challenge, because life per se has not been uniformly defined or understood from different not schools of thought, different walks of life, poets, artists. Like normally we see that everybody has got different understanding of life, but to come to a working definition, so I think something has to be explored there. So these are my things, so you can just
Sure. So thank you for your questions. Very nice questions. The first one is on Professor Charles Towns. So Professor Charles Towns is a very special person because he's a very, very broad-minded scientist, and he's also very broad-minded, and he's got enough humility to understand, and not just him, but many other scientists, as we have seen from the books of Dr. T.D. Singh, have come to that understanding that science is not just a materialistic pursuit. But unfortunately, what I was speaking of is the general scientific community has a way to reach out to just the general scientific community, even if they don't accept God at all, or if they don't accept anything spiritual, they can still be scientists, because that is not a prerequisite. In fact, just the material knowledge itself is enough to be a scientist. So I was speaking just from a general point of view.
Yes.
Now coming to the workings definition, yes, I agree. That part is very difficult, but I think I feel that's something we can as a community put our thoughts and our creativity at work, because
Yes.
it will
Correct.
do a lot of good, right?
Yes.
Because so everybody can have their own definition,
Yes.
but when I say a working definition, it would be based on such this and this and this. We define consciousness as this, right? So when you lay out certain boundary conditions, then nobody can argue.
Yes.
So it's based on these boundary conditions or based on these axioms, we are using this definition of science that was published here. For example, nobody will argue, right? But if it becomes a very subjective thing, then
Yes.
everybody will have their own. So that's what I meant by
The challenge.
a working. Yeah. So just like the
Yeah.
word spiriton, right? When I
Yes.
speak about the word spiriton, I say that has the particle of life defined by Dr. T.D. Singh, and I define it as spiriton, right? And nobody can argue because there is a reference behind it. So in the same way, for many of these terms, like consciousness and life, if we can have certain simple definitions that people can generally accept, I think then we can continue to have deeper conversations.
Yeah. So that means coming to science, we can
Mhm.
have two categories of science. We can have pure science, pure scientists who are true scientists, and then we
Mhm.
have general scientists. So that the inspiration for
Mm.
the science should come from the true scientist. So that can help to synthesize with. So that can help us also in the working definition of life through the
Um, so
platform of.
yeah, definitely it can help. But the
Yes.
thing is, how do we define true scientists and a general scientist?
Yeah.
It gets difficult to define. And especially within the scientific community, it gets difficult to define, because if somebody has published so many scientific papers and they've made inventions, but they don't believe in God, and we call them a general scientist and not a true scientist, we may accept it, but
No,
the
we
rest of
can
the
take
community.
we can take from the founders of science. We have founders of science who are true scientists and who have included spiritual elements. So if they
Yeah,
can be taken as a what you call inspiration, so that
yeah,
makes that something like
yeah.
that.
Yes, we could do something like that, but it'd be better to have certain like certain, what's the word, certain points of reference to say that based on this and this and this, we are defining it as this. So you can have any definition you want, but
Yeah.
I'm using this definition based on these
Hmm.
principles, yeah, or this literature or this publication. So because we do that all the time in science, we say that based on this definition published by so and so, we are following in that
Yeah,
in
got
that
it.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Dr.
Thank
JB.
you.
Thank you, Dr. Viknish. So we got two more participants who are asking questions. Can I call upon Niket to ask the first question? Keep it short, and then Deepshika after Niket. Niket, can you please unmute yourself? Thanks.
Yes, yes, sir. Thank you for giving this knowledge on science and religion. And my
Thank you.
question would be like, are we going post-modern world, or we are looking back? Like earlier, we did not have any agricultural revolution, and most of us used to have organic food only at that time. But
Sorry,
now
say the last
with
part again. I
fertilization,
can't hear. Most of us only
yes,
had what?
my question. Most of us mainly had those natural foods only, like organic foods, what we say now in modern world.
Hmm.
Like, but now again, after some agricultural revolution, fertilizers, pesticides came, and people started getting more conscious about these things. Then again, we put back to organic and getting sold also at higher prices. So means there is speculation about like we are going postmodern, or is it like we are going back to the previous time? Uh, that is the thing.
His question is: are we
See,
going back to postmodern time? Are we moving forward to postmodern times? Or are we going back to the past
yeah.
age?
So
To the
okay,
previous.
okay. So yeah, so I will try to uh, answer that based on the context of today's discussion. If we try to understand what is the goal, right, of life, and what is the goal of food, even, right? Then then it'll be easier to know which is the right way to go and which is not. But because we don't have that kind of a spiritual backing, right? Then the understanding is that wherever we can get more food is better, right? More food. So that's why using harsh pesticides, so-called harsh pesticides, was allowed, because the goal was just that, okay, we need to get more food. And so since the insects are disturbing the crops, so we can put these things in without considering the other consequences. So the point I want to make is that if we take a materialistic approach, then there will be unforeseen circumstances that we need to struggle with, like what you're talking about, right? But if we take the guidance of spiritual backing, as we produce food and other things, so we're not forgetting science, right? We're using this to advantage, but with the purpose in mind, and with the boundaries laid out by our previous teachers and by the scriptures, then we won't go through these issues.
Thank
That's
you.
my understanding.
Thank you, Dr. Vignesh, for your answer. Thanks, Niket, for
Yes,
your question. Can we have Deepshika to
thank you, sir.
unmute yourself,
Thank
please?
you.
Deepshika.
Hello. Hello, sir. Thank you for such a nice talk. My question
you.
is, how, as a scientist, we will be able to advocate people for about the effectiveness of the like the past life studies or yoga for the treatment, because these things take time, and nowadays nobody is so patient to wait for that much long time for the results to happen. So mostly people go for the modern medicine and stuff like that. So how is it possible to advocate such things?
Yes, people go for quick fixes nowadays, but there are a lot of recorded data of how it works, right? So we just have to show the data, of yoga, of past life studies. In fact, in Singapore, there is a therapist who actually does past life regression to help the patients, and she said within her community, it's accepted as a fact. So I think the data would speak by itself, because even if people don't accept it immediately, but if they are aware of the data, and when they go through certain issues, then they would give it more thought. You see, so that is one way to help them, to make the data visible.
Okay, thank you for your. Is that okay? I think she got the answer.
Okay.
Thank you. Can we have the next question from Radhika?
Namaste, sir. It was a wonderful session, and I could
Thank you.
really relate to a lot of topics which you discussed, because I have a background in science, as well as I'm currently pursuing my yoga, post-graduation in yoga and consciousness.
Okay.
So it's wonderful that you kind of like brought together both the aspects of science and spirituality, but in terms of yoga, because it is more of a holistic approach, where the science is mostly looking at the objective side of like the objective knowledge, the materialistic aspects and the body, whereas the subjective knowledge, which is kind of like the science of self, and also looking more into the subtle body. So my question is like, in terms of these studies with respect to consciousness, If you could just give some more insights into how it is being studied.
Oh, you mean from a scientific point of view, is it?
Yes, from scientific point of view.
Okay, I from what I remember, but I'll be happy to relook at these things. But from what I remember, most of these studies are based on the nervous system that relates to consciousness. So the definition of consciousness is very much linked to the nervous system. So, for example, right, we know that the cell is alive, and I would say the cell is conscious because when you put a stimulus, the cell would go towards the stimulus, and when you put something the cells don't like, the cell would move away or it would react in different ways. So, for me, from a practical point of view, and also from the knowledge I've gathered from the Vedic scriptures, I would say consciousness is a symptom of life, and that is a symptom of life. And cells undergo division, cells grow, they undergo division, and they eventually die. But for most scientists, the movements of a cell is like a more advanced form of Brownian motion. Where if you have a particle floating, according to the stimulus that hit the particle will move in certain directions. So the cell is the same way. It has certain receptors that influence it to move in certain ways or to undergo certain properties, or to arrest its cell development, or to go through mitosis, whatever, right? But it's all controlled by these receptors. But the cell itself is not conscious, largely because it has no nervous system. You see,
the cell has the memory. We all know that each cell has the memory.
Yeah.
So in terms of science, also we are studying that. And
true.
And from the Western philosopher's point of view, the consciousness is more of a brain activity. But Eastern philosophers do not believe that, because it is more of it is considered as Jada, which is like matter.
Yes.
So that is the bridging. So that gap, how would you how are these studies able to bridge that gap? So I was just always.
So no, it's a very good point, right? Which is something we need to think about. Which is why I say if we can have working definitions based on certain boundaries or certain points that nobody can argue with, like just like axioms, right? Nobody can argue with axioms based on some fundamental principle, and says based on these principles we define it like this, right? So at least from that point of view, from that platform, it cannot be argued. So then we can get the message across. You see, but yeah, it's a very good question actually. And even the memory of the cells, if a cell biologist would simply understand it as what's this epigenetic factors, right, that cause these cells to have these memories, or has activation of certain genes within the cell itself, which gives it its memory, right? So they try to make it as mechanistic as possible. So that's why I was saying if we can have a certain boundary platform where everybody can agree with, at least to have a conversation, and then the details can be discussed later.
Thank you, Dr. Viknish.
Okay, thank you, sir. And one last question is, are there any studies currently, and I didn't look it up, regarding the entry point of consciousness? Like, what is the entry point of consciousness when the cell is fertilized?
It's a very, I don't know the answer, but it's a very like I don't know of anyone who has done studies on this, but I think it's an important study, to show. So again, if you look at the biology of it, at the point of fertilization, there's a increase in calcium flux within the cells that cause a cascade of activities within the cells, right? That cause polarization to happen, and then different cells go to different compartments, and then but when exactly life starts, we don't know, because the cell itself is alive, right? But it's a very good point. I never really thought about it. It's a very good point. Yeah, I should look it up too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a wonderful session. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have another question by number 134. There's no name, so can you please unmute yourself? N0134.
Hello, Hare Krishna. This is Anita here from Hyderabad. Very good speech. Very good speech about, like I heard everything is what question I was going to ask. The same thing she was asking about it. Okay. It's like a cell. Every cell has a conscious. Every cell has like in every body, like they have cells and membranes. I'm very much away from the science, technologies, all this. I'm totally not a background of science or anything, but still I have a question about this. Like since billion years, when we are asking about this origin and science and what is the difference between the science and the spiritual and everything, how the origin came from where it came. And through the scriptures, we heard like, maybe it's right or not, like since billion years, the sun, the sound of the sun, that came into a living entity, and the soul thing. Like when we are breathing in and when we are breathing out, the cells and membranes, they are working out. Like you are explaining all this science, whatever they are explaining. If they don't have a soul, even when they don't have a soul, cells still they work for some hours after death. So how do you explain this? And also there's one more thing. When the cell in every body, they have many cells. So one body has one soul and one Paramatma. Like according to our culture, where I'm like, maybe I'm not discouraging any of the other cultures or anything, but I believe too much, like I'm in this Atma and Paramatma thing. And I believe in, like every cell has Atma also now.
Yeah.
Like every cell has Atma? When she was asking about the conscious, like we are explaining about Pancha Koshas and Pancha, like Vata, Pitta, everything. These things, like when we are into depth of this yoga thing and all, behind science there is something supernatural thing, and they don't. So how do you explain about it? And one more thing is, this is the thing. Like these are all the questions which I have, and how many souls we have in one body then. Yesterday, day before yesterday, one person was explaining about the seed and one, like according to Big Bang theory. So when we are hearing all these things, it's total, like it's some bit of confusion. What's we are from bacteria, like. So can you explain me about this? Thank you, Hare Krishna.
So with regard to the, I'll explain the best I can. With regard to every cell having an Atma, yes, that's true. Every cell has a Atma, but within the organism, there's the primary Atma, right? Like the main soul, and all the other cells, they are there within each cell, but the person itself, who, for example, every cell in my body has an Atma, but the main Atma, apart from Paramatma, the main Atma is myself, right? And everyone else, every other soul comes and goes according to the cells. So that's my understanding about the body itself. So yes, every cell would have an Atma, based on my understanding, and they work according to the direction of Paramatma. And I mean, so this is probably a very complex answer, right? If you know, but this is the general understanding that I have. And then with regard to your other question about what is the first question?
The sun, the origin of life, origin of everything, how it came about?
Origin of everything, I heard it from some, I heard it from some scriptures. There is a sound, and sound came into the living entity, and the soul formed, and everything like that.
Yeah. So
Totally, I cannot say that Lord Shiva entered first and Vishnu or anything. I don't want to tell any of the God's name.
So in essence, every living entity comes from God, right, and into this Mahatattva, and then we will the goal of each living entity is to reestablish his relationship with the Supreme Lord. Right, that's the goal of every living entity, and so we have our free will to enjoy, suffer, whatever within this material world. So, but to answer your question, everyone comes from the Lord, and once this material world is destroyed, we go back again into the Lord.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Viknish, Krishnan, Kutty, for your presentation and the enlivening discussion, and for all your questions.